Welcome to Culmination, where everything comes together. In the process of becoming our best self, I have with me the first-year engineering student, Kevin DeWall, to discuss innovation and everything that it entails. So, with that said, let's get started. So, Kevin.
Yes.
How would you define innovation?
So innovation is what most people say the process of making new. When I did a little bit of research on the word of innovation, it derives from Latin, in as in going into or going in, and novum, which is new. So into new almost.
Into new.
Yeah. Like into like a new era probably is what they were kind of defining that word as in early Latin.
So how would you apply that to what you know, like today and in your life?
Well, in my life, I do a lot of work as an engineer and all that stuff, and making new designs every day. And some techniques you need to use and require an innovation to improve your product almost. So if you need like a new part that would make it work, you're going to need some innovation. If you're just making a completely new thing, that's innovation in of itself. It's making new.
Making new. So would you consider like an alteration of something that already exists to be innovation?
Yeah, I would probably say that. I guess innovation can also not just be defined by a certain threshold or whatever. It's really up to the individual to decide what is innovation or not. It could be a certain, I don't know if there's like a sense of how much innovation you can really measure. It's not really like a measurable quantity. I would probably say it's more of like a judgment kind of deal.
Judgment. So what's an example of such?
An example of innovation today would probably be most of among the university today and among universities, there's all kinds of professors doing research projects and all that stuff, testing new products and new kinds of, I guess, ways of learning and studying things. So that's what they're doing. They're making new. Some engineering professors found entire companies based off of their research and what they find. And by delivering these new methods and these new products into the world, they're in the continued process of innovation.
So you think it's a process, not exactly a goal, or not a goal, but like a destination itself?
It's you can say that innovation is mostly, when most people say innovation, they think of a noun. Like
a noun.
Like innovate, it could become a verb, it could become a noun, it could become even an adjective.
Like what?
Adjective, sorry. Like innovative.
Agitative.
Adjective is an innovative, like that product was very innovative, meaning that it applied many new methods that made it, I guess, what it is.
So I'm just trying to think about this. So what is something that you know of that is, like, you look at that and it's like, that is innovative, and you can explain why?
Well, one thing that I would probably consider, drawing from history, would you prefer it be a modern day innovation, or would you prefer more of a historical innovation?
Whatever you would like.
Alrighty, I guess going back to the good old NASA days of the space race, I consider the Apollo rockets, the Saturn V rockets, to be very, very innovative, which is basically the rocket that delivered humans to the moon.
I thought that was Apollo 11.
Apollo 11, that was a series of missions.
Okay.
Saturn V was the rocket that brought the astronauts to the moon.
I see.
And it was amazing. It was the largest rocket of its time. It used the biggest engines of its time. Don't quote me on that, but it was definitely the most powerful engines of the time. And it was at a time where the Cold War was an era where it was not necessarily a war like World War II was. It was the constant threat of a war.
It was just like two nations trying to one-up each other in every way possible.
Exactly. And that of course is going to be required to make a lot of new, to innovate a lot in order to impress people about what's new. And this nation did this new thing, so that means that they're better in a way because they're innovating and they're becoming better.
Right. It's like, oh man, the Russians in 1957 released Sputnik.
Yeah, the Sputnik.
This little ball in the space. We got to go outclass them.
Yeah, and it was... To be honest, if you were a person at that time, you'd probably be scared too, because you don't know what this ball might contain. And even if it didn't contain anything, it was a massive thief innovation, because at that time they were kind of most people can equate the winning of World War II to, I guess, the air power of the Allies. And
Air power?
Air power as in like air force power, like planes. You could probably also say aircraft carriers. And that's, most people equate that to the Allies winning. Like the Battle of Britain, which was mainly the battle in the skies. It was purely an air-based war. I mean, not war, but a battle.
Yeah.
Between the Luftwaffe, the Nazi Air Force, and Britain Air Force. And the Brits actually won that one in the long term. And that prevented the Nazi advance into Britain from conquering that area and knocking it out of the war. But my main point in all this is that they were very afraid back then that the innovation in space could lead to an entirely new futuristic front in war that would lead to the other losing, just as the air innovations had led to the loss of the Axis.
So what do you think is exactly the primary incentive, or if it needs an incentive, like for innovation? Like, do we always innovate because we have a specific incentive, like, oh, I have to win this war or something, or can we build it from the ground up without really
violence,
like a threat or something? Yeah.
I wholeheartedly believe that innovation kind of can occur within anyone's kind of motive. There could be any motive behind innovation.
I see.
But the end product of innovation, most people innovate because it could be argued that innovation itself has more byproducts than any other human process. Because out of a new innovation, depending on how large it is, in a sense, can create entirely new unintended fronts of culture, of even more innovation after that.
Yeah.
It's so not necessarily for winning a war. It happens much more frequently during a war because people have to innovate to save their lives, to save their country and all that stuff. But it can certainly happen during times of peace. And as long as they have the motive and the spirit, anyone can truly innovate.
Yeah. And I guess like that question is more of the basis of like, think about an invention, like something that helps and changes society, but might not be innovative in the connotative sense of like, oh wow, it completely changes something. Like the Gutenberg press, for an example, like that was innovative because it had the unintended consequence of basically propelling the entire Protestant Revolution. Because now people have the Bible accessible, while it used to be this thing that basically everybody told you what the Bible quote unquote said, and you just shut up and assume that's what it says.
Exactly.
But now you can read it for yourself. Not only that alone, but also it's being translated, and it's easier to be translated because, everybody's getting copies of that. But think about like other inventions, or like, I don't know, like think about the color TV for an example. It's like the TV was innovative, but now you have the color TV, which is the TV again, but it's not necessarily innovative. But what would you have to say about that?
Like I was kind of talking before, people kind of have their own standards for what innovation is. And I believe that innovation is something that people set their own standards for. It's almost like an art in a way. You interpret the art how it is. So if you don't have to necessarily equate a lot of innovation to the color TV, but someone can see it in a completely different way, saying that this changed the way we see things, because all kind of like photos besides paintings were any kind of pictures, that's what they called it back then, were always in black and white. There was never really anything color-wise. So
I always like the joke of like telling my dad, hey Dad, did you start to see in color? Like,
yeah,
like after a certain year, because that's when the colored pictures came out.
They did that all the time in cartoons. It was absolutely hilarious when they did that.
Yeah. It's like my dad literally saw in black and white, guys.
That's amazing.
So you think it's kind of subjective in that sense?
I do believe it's subjective. I've had many colleagues over the years that probably have argued over certain products, that whether it was innovative or not, and they had many good points, but in reality they were in theory both correct in a way. They brought points that made of found the product not so innovative, and points that found the product very innovative. And it's all a measure of quantity and how much you believe it's making new, quote unquote.
So now I'm curious. here's a fun question. So what is something that most people would say that's not really innovative or nobody really cares about it, but you personally find extremely innovative? Like you could make an argument. You could write a whole ass research paper on this.
Right. That's a really tricky one because there's many people today that take many innovations for granted in a way.
I mean, hell, the pencil.
The pencil.
Like one of the greatest pieces of technology, and we're like, oh, this thing is...
Would you mean
It's just a pencil, man.
right. Would you mean in the sense like people taking such innovations for granted, or just simply like a recent innovation that people might have not caught on to as much as I believe they should?
I guess I more so thought of it as a taken for granted, but you could interpret it anyway.
I'll give an instance. One quote one saying I guess I've often seen was, I don't want this question to be so dodgy, so I'm gonna try to kind of connect it back.
Yep.
But the people watched Star Trek back then. People still watch a little bit of Star Trek now. It was a wonderful TV series. And in retrospect, you look back at that and you're saying, it's amazing how far computers have come, and how because while watching Star Trek, the computers look extremely primitive, almost like as if they were in the exact setting that they were. They looked, at least the earlier episodes of Star Trek, they looked like NASA computers practically.
What year did it come out, by the way?
I'm guessing probably either 60s or 70s.
Okay.
I'm not too big. I'm not too big Star Trek fan. I'm more of a Star Wars guy. But
okay, continue.
Yeah, it looks more like NASA computers back then. And when you're looking at that, you have this realization from a modern perspective that Star Trek makes us become so optimistic about computers today, because just how far we've advanced in computing technologies. But yet we're so, I guess, down when we think about our space travel capabilities, because Star Trek, they're exploring entire galaxies and planets and all, and going at incredible speeds. And today we can barely even get back to the moon.
That's true. I mean, they did have the power of green screens.
Yeah, they did have the power of green screens and new cinematography or
cinematography.
Cinematography. Yeah.
Cinnamon. Asynchronous.
Asynchronous.
Continue.
Alrighty. But like looking back at that, I guess today many people kind of forget about space travel and take that for granted, I would say. I mean, it's what I'm going into, so I'm going to have obviously a little bit of bias in that sense. But like that Star Trek example, you could say that people actually take both of the fronts that I was talking about for granted. They don't realize how amazing computers have strived in the past years, and they've kind of forgotten about how space has not lived up to the promise of what Star Trek was portraying.
Yeah, it was always really weird because it was like, the 60s, we made this groundbreaking, like, human feat of getting to the moon.
Right.
Like this thing that, like, was unheard of. And then
Absolutely
we did it,
incredible.
and then we kept going to space. We set up the International Space Station and everything. I mean, we put rovers on Mars and everything. But then we just kind of, at least from my experience as someone who hasn't been too involved with anything space related, it's just like, yeah, it kind of feels like everybody forgot about space in the last 30 years. It's like, really? Like, it's so much, it's literally so much bigger than all of us. It's so crazy. It's literally out of this world.
Yeah, that's a good saying.
But it's like nobody cared about it until like now, I guess.
Fairly now. My personal belief is that we're coming up on something I want to call the space renaissance. A rebirth of space, if you will.
Like Da Vinci on the moon?
Yeah, Da Vinci on the moon. There's going to be a Renaissance man that knows how space is going.
I see. Maybe it'll be you.
Maybe it'll be me. Who knows? I'm the Renaissance man myself. I can paint and I can make inventions, guys.
I can paint on the moon.
I can paint on the moon and Mars.
Anyway, keep going.
And I would say that the Renaissance in of itself was a very innovative era, even though it might have not had. It was alongside the scientific revolution that started by Copernicus when he proposed his idea of a heliocentric universe, or at least a heliocentric model, which means that the sun is the center of like at least it meant that the sun was the center of, I guess, the universe at the time, that the world was not the center of the universe.
Yep.
That was kind of the first, I guess, rebellion against what the Catholic Church had in place for how science worked. But the Renaissance in turn was, I would say, was actually a very innovative era without necessarily the science, because you have these new styles of painting. That's making new. That's what innovation is. So,
and it was almost like documentation too, like before documentation.
Right, documentation, new forms of art. You have all these absolute geniuses that are not necessarily like scientific wits, but they're extremely amazing, talented artists. And many people think of innovation as something as like a science exclusive or a STEM exclusive field.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make.
But I would argue that's not. I would argue that because of the kind of like the roots that I was talking about, that it was mainly meant to represent making new. You're not necessarily that's not exclusive to science. It encompasses everything that's making new. So you're making a new art style, that's innovation.
So I guess one thing that I am wondering is like making new and this idea of innovation just in general. Do you think how broad do you think that goes exactly? Like, do you think it's making new and expanding the limits of humans and mankind, or do you think it's beyond us too?
I believe it's beyond us, to be honest.
Explain.
You can argue that the process of evolution is innovation as well. It's almost like as if like whatever creator or process you believe in, it's kind of like that is designing the creatures or products to be roaming a certain thing. So it's almost like a biological process of engineering automatically.
Yeah.
And it's making new creatures and new species to fulfill niches within the system. It might not be defined by a human, or it might not be defined by a specific thing, but it's definitely making new species and making new kind of offshoots of ancestors and of common ancestors as well. So I don't believe it's just limited to what us humans do. It truly would encompass almost everything.
So you think that how do you think that, like, even though animals evolve over time, like, how do you think that can necessarily be innovative? Because I guess it's a weird question, because it's hard to understand innovation from a lens that's not our own, because as humans we're meant to kind of expand, not only just like procreate, but like create. Like, kind of back to the Renaissance, it's like art and anthropology and science and religion and everything. It's like the study of man, and everybody is born to have like a different role to add to the piece of the puzzle. You have the people who design new buildings, and then the people designed to build those buildings. You have the people to document all of history. You have the people to fight the wars that get implemented into history. Like, I don't know, it's hard to think about innovation from a non-human perspective.
Yeah, it is very difficult, but if you think about it, human civilization is in and of itself is like evolution. It can be argued that innovation is almost like a step in evolution. When you're making something new, you're progressing something.
And you're evolving.
And you're evolving, yes. And humans not necessarily have evolved biologically, but we've evolved in the sense of everything as well. Science, art, understanding of how morals, philosophy, psychology. Yeah. You can literally name all human subjects, and that could be it was all innovation of great geniuses that advanced these studies.
It's also really interesting to me. I just thought of another point that's like it's weird to think about, where it's like, think about innovation where we're creating something new, right? Like, we're using that word create, which kind of has the connotation and possibly denotation. I don't know. I didn't look it up. Sorry, guys. But, but you know, of bringing something from the ground up, creating something that did not exist before, making it new in existence. But if you think about it, like things like psychology and science, it's interesting how we not necessarily create, but create in the sense of these theories and these advancements and conclusions and basically things that allow us to see how we work and understand how we work better. But it's weird to think that that's innovative. It's weird to think about it being innovative because these things always existed. Psychology always existed. It's just we didn't know about these things before. Like, we didn't know about all these mental disorders until, like, the psychologist did experiments and figured it out. So it's weird to think that even though we had innovation that created, that added to mankind, it's not like we really created it. It's always existed, but now we used, like, a magnifying glass to see it.
I have a perfect answer to your question. When I was touring in, I think it was Florence or Rome or something. I think it was Florence. I was listening. We were on tour for mostly sculptures of Michelangelo, probably arguably one of the greatest sculpting geniuses to ever live.
Wait, was he one of the sculptors, or he did the Sistine Chapel?
He did
right?
the Sistine Chapel, and that was actually a little bit of a side tangent story, but that was actually a very risky move of the church to put him to that, because he hadn't actually painted anything before that.
What?
Yeah, I don't think he actually painted anything before he did the Sistine Chapel, and he did this like, okay,
beginner's luck.
Yeah,
I guess?
beginner's luck, and he did amazing on that too. So he was in a sense a Renaissance man because he knew how to paint too, I guess.
It's like, what did you do today?
I painted the Sistine Chapel.
Keep going.
All right,
back to what we were saying.
Back to what I was saying. Yeah. So what he would say, his saying was when he was sculpting, is that he would see a block of whatever he was using, marble for a sense. And the way he basically sculpted his works, where he was quote unquote freeing the statue from the marble, as if it was already there to begin with.
Elaborate on that.
His techniques were his versions of freeing it. He already knew it was there, basically. He already knew it was within there. All they had to do was simply just pluck off,
the unneeded
bits, and make it more clear. So it's like that with psychology. Everything's already there.
Yeah.
Everything as well. Everything's already there. It already exists in a way. But you're like Michelangelo, slowly peeling away the layers and finding the actual product under it.
And, you know, like, I actually have a perfect thing to add to that, as I kind of alluded to it before, not necessarily through allusion, but talking about the word create. So recently I've been reading through Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And alongside that, I've been reading, like, it's like a book that goes through Genesis, but it has like a commentary and everything. And that was very helpful because, you know, when you're reading the Bible, like, no matter what version you're using, it's like, what does this mean?
Yeah, what does this mean?
You know, like this is deep and all, but like, what? Like, the grammar and the syntax is a bit funky sometimes. So this commentary book kind of puts things into perspective. It's also really nice because it gets into some of the ancient Hebrew, as the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and every translation has, you know, it reveals the same messages, but there's some nuances that you can't get until you actually break down the original language that it was written in. But anyway, it talks about, at the very beginning, like Genesis 1, when God creates the world, it talked about this distinction where God created man in his image. He created man, but man cannot create. They can only make, because God created the world. God created the tides of the ocean. He created the galaxies and solar systems. He created the dirt on the earth. We're just on earth as people. We were made by God. I mean, you know, going off of the biblical, like, belief and everything.
Right.
And so with that logic, I guess the takeaway from it is we only make things out of what has already been created. We can't truly bring something from the ground up.
Yeah,
But can we? Do you think we can?
I guess that kind of connects back to what I was saying. Like, we're freeing concepts from, I guess, otherwise chaos in a way.
Chaos.
Chaos in the sense that when if you believe that like it was like all that stuff has been created and that's already been there, we can only make in a way, but we can't truly, I guess, make anything out like thin air in that kind of setting. It's almost like freeing in a way, because you can gather up things and you can make something. You can mold it. You can kind of cut away at it or 3D print it even. Like you can use almost any kind of process of making something.
Yeah.
And that is in theory creating to our minds. We're not making anything out of thin air. We're not adding, I guess, if you want to start talking about nuclear physics or anything like that, but we're not really, in the sense of the Bible, we're not actually really bringing anything else into the earth. We're simply just kind of recycling and making, I guess, new things out of that. We're making new, basically.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah. Recycling and making it in the sense like making it more useful to us as an innovation. So it does aid mankind in a sense. Like we do innovate for mankind. I believe that's kind of goes back to that earlier question. Yeah, I think that's what most people intend. You could start talking that the development of nuclear weapons was not necessarily a good innovation for mankind. Yeah. You could argue it is because it's so devastating that people are not fighting wars. That is true. We're not fighting wars that much. But it still killed a lot of people. Yeah. And it's still absolutely devastating. It destroyed a city. So two cities, yeah. Well, and even if it's not atomic bombs, it's just like napalm and stuff, like clearing those jungles and in Vietnam, and then like in Dresden after World War II in Germany. So that actually leads to another talking point that I wanted to discuss, and I hope we kind of covered a lot of the questions that we had in this earlier segment, just so we don't leave any stone unturned before moving on. But so technology, this neutral concept of things that we use to aid mankind, basically, like the pencil to allow us to write and document, or the computers that were so primitive they took up entire rooms and could barely even run Pong. And now and then they eventually like shot a rocket into space on the moon for the first time, like uncharted territory. So technology is good, and it's also bad. What are your thoughts on technology as a whole before we get into it more? Innovation is like a tool for mankind in a sense. It is like hope. It is like a quality that we have, an action that we possess within our skill set as humans. And by making, I guess, making the new, like I said before, it creates many byproducts. It creates new cultures. It creates new ways of doing things that we do in our waking lives. And when you have new things, you can use it for the best thing ever. You can use it for the worst thing ever. And I do believe it is a neutral thing, because you kind of have this piece of technology just kind of running, just sitting there kind of. I mean, it can be a running piece of technology, but you can still load things into it, or you can still kind of corrupt it or make it pure. And that's all dependent upon the humans who make it. Yeah. I always that's been one of the things on my mind of just like, it's crazy how not only there's like a duality of man that exists, like the same like humankind that can, do all of these righteous things and save lives, and like they're the people who like saved the Jews in the Holocaust. They're the people who made sure that we don't forget certain aspects of history before they're forgotten, like all these different things. But we're also the same mankind to develop these nuclear weapons for our own demise and use cameras everywhere to basically spy on people and invent social credit scores. But like when thinking about this, I kind of wanted to say two examples, I guess, one good and one bad, that I just kind of wanted to talk about it. Sure thing. So for one good, I love this song called IGY. It stands for International Geophysical Year. It's by Donald Fagen, the lead singer of Steely Dan, but this is his solo album. And he's basically
it's one of the most positive songs I've ever heard in my life. And it's so weird because it's about technology. Basically, the entire song is this look into the future of how technology, like, saves the world, or not necessarily saves the world, but just makes it so much better, so convenient, and it's so bright. You know, it's I don't know, it's just very optimistic, and it's one of the most interesting songs that I know of, because you don't really see this positive view of technology that often, or really just this positive aspect of the future in general, because everybody's so worried about, like, our own demise, whether it's through climate change or, like, you know, like nuclear holocaust or something, exactly. You know? So hearing this song that's like, on that train, all graphite and glitter, undersea by rail, like, it's just, you know, it's just so soothing. It's so optimistic, and it's like, what, like, it takes you out of reality, because reality, at least society, it's like, it's so negative. But I don't know, it's amazing. Like, how are some ways that you view the good sides of technology?
The good sides of technology, being an engineer and wanting to do that dedication for my life, I see it so much as it could be such a great thing for humanity, because the innovation is creating new culture and creating new, I guess, fronts of people to do things. And I feel that in the sense over many years that humanity has been kind of, in a way, kind of like getting more depressed and kind of without things to do. Yeah. Like, there may be like a new app or something like that, but it's not a big enough innovation to create the byproducts that we want. Maybe for temporary, like a new game or something like that. That's going to create some culture and maybe some good laughs, but it can only last for so long and have such a long impact.
And it's interesting to think about, like, what is there a limit of innovation? Like, is there a limit of how far we can go? Because, you know, we could sit on our 21st century high horse and say, yeah, everything's been done before, but I mean, that's the exact same thing that people said in the 50s.
Exactly.
When they got the microwave and the TV and better radios and all of this stuff.
I think part of the reason why you could probably guess there's been a little bit of a stagnation, in sense that people are, like you were talking about before, kind of the insane, I guess, products of the bad innovation, all that stuff, like nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction and ways to max execute people at an instant. People are, I would probably say, partially the reason why people are holding back right now, you would say, is that people are scared a little bit. I mean, you can't blame them. The technology only grows and innovation only grows in capabilities. Mm-hmm. And it's a neutral thing in the end. Yeah. Like we were talking about. And it could be used for so much good and so much bad.
Yeah. Like, I have the perfect example for one. It's like, think about the mind reader, right? Like, yeah. Like one of these, like, sci-fi concepts, kind of like teleportation or body swapping.
Telepathy, basically.
It's like, well, just some sort of device, kind of like an advanced lie detector, but that just takes, like, motions and translates it to a lie. But, like, actually being able to read your articulate thoughts from your brain. Let's think about this. Like, let's think about the good. Let's be optimistic for a second. If you could do that, you basically, like, you can help so many people, because especially when so many people are depressed, it's like you just throw on this mind reader and it's like they don't have to go through all of these challenges of trying to explain to you a concept that they don't understand, because you can just understand it through the mind reader. Yeah. But on the contrary, well, I mean, one simple thing with that is then you render psychologists basically useless, unless they are the ones administrating these practices. That's not nearly the worst example, though. The worst example is like a tyrannical government basically using these mind readers to control you. Like, the thing about 1984 or whatever is, like, yes, these things are real.
The telescreens.
Yeah, but, like, when they can actually read your mind and everything, you know, like, the reason why history repeats is because whenever there's a tyrannical regime, there will always be people against it and will rise up and overthrow it. That's why this cycle of basically liberalism and authoritarianism keeps going. But if you take away the autonomy of thought, which is basically all we have left when we're in a tyrannical regime, what do you do? And that's scary.
Right. It is very scary. It's like the pencil example before a little bit. You can have Martin Luther King pick up that pencil and write "I Have a Dream" speech that inspired millions of people, and it continues to inspire people to this day.
But you can also have Hitler write Mein Kampf.
Right, Mein Kampf in prison after he's been arrested for the Beer Hall putsch.
Right.
Which I believe that many people that are listening could probably understand what that led to.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's, again, like, back to the song. It's nice to hear. We're always thinking about that, like the negatives of, like, literally 1984. But to think about, like, you know, there are some really cool things that technology can do. And I guess if we all got on the same page of, like, kind of thinking more optimistically and looking at this innovation, like, for mankind, like, that could bring a sense of unity in times, especially when we're not always unified, whether it's family or friends or your entire nation, hell, even the world. Like, just set on this goal of let's look onward. Now, I guess for you, I mean, we've talked about this off recording before. Like, you personally believe that space is like the way to go, like the next step, right?
I do.
Tell us about it.
I was just about to say that even without mentioning space. I was about to bring up an example. That's great.
I read your mind.
You used the mind detector.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that, like I said before, innovation in strides creates new culture and many other byproducts besides the culture. And I think what most astronauts say, what most of them agree upon is that a human in this day and age has to go to space at least once in their life. And the reason being is that, what I've heard from other people as well, is that when you're out there and you just see the vastness of it, you see just a single blue rock. And when you think about that from our perspective as just a single planetary species, everything that you've ever kind of loved, hated, taking a little page out of I think it was Mark Sagan's book. Everything that you loved, hate, and anything that you've ever basically thought of besides the 1% of your memory that's focused on space has been on that planet. And when you look at it, many people have expressed an urge to want to protect that to the end of their lives, protect the world and everything on it, and it gives them a sense of unity almost, and it makes them much more, I guess, optimistic, and thinking like, what have I been doing this entire time? There's been dictators fighting over just a tiny little slice of that dot that contains everything.
1 acre of land sometimes.
Yeah, 1 acre of land.
Oh man. You know, that's really interesting because you explain this story with a positive lens and a positive ending, but and this is the interesting thing about interpretation, when I was listening to it, I was actually leading towards a very negative, like a complete opposite, like interpretation of that, where I could see somebody standing on that moon looking at this rock and saying, like, look how insignificant everything is. Like, while you see it, and, well, you know, it's not like I think this way or you think that way. It's very much more nuanced and gray than it is black and white. It's just like, as you said, people can look at it and be like, man, this is precious. This is our home. This is what we know, and we need to protect it. I could see other people thinking completely nihilistic, like, this is so insignificant. Look at the stars. Look at everything. I mean, hey, maybe that could bounce into an optimistic thing of maybe the world is just the starting grounds, and here we have an entire galaxy to play with.
That could be grounds for expansion.
But only if you think of it that way.
Only if you think of it that way.
If you don't think of it that way, maybe you feel like, wow, this is entirely meaningless. And I feel like that's one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest dangers of our generation. It's just this idea, because I mean, I've heard people on this planet, they haven't been to the moon and gotten that additional insight, but they're already saying it's just a floating rock in space. I'll be out of here in like 60 years and none of it will matter. How can, this is such a complex issue, and there's literally like psychologists and therapists who dedicate their lives to like cleaning up the mess that nihilism has left for them, essentially. So obviously you don't know the answers to it, but give us some insight of how we could kind of look onward, like look past that, look at this same picture, because we're looking at the same picture, right?
Right.
Yeah, and view it with this sense of we're going to innovate together for mankind and reach for the stars, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, by the way.
Maybe literally.
Yeah, literally. I also want to make an apology to the audience. I named the guy Mark Sagan. I can't believe I did that. His name is Carl Sagan.
Oh.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, look up his speech on that. It's really inspiring. But off that side.
Bob Saget, yeah.
Yeah. But like you said, even when the nihilist sees something that insignificant, they could be compelled to look on the other side of that and see the moon that they're on and see the stars among them and be inspired in that sense. And I think there's going to be a new kind of regard for a future culture, if there's a sense. Many people like saying that there's been a degradation of culture over the years, and I think space is one of the most qualified paths to a new kind of unifying culture that would make people more optimistic than pessimistic.
And what's that culture you see?
I see simply a multi-planetary culture. One where it's just not Earth that people are living on, but one where people are living on other planets. Mars, Jupiterian and Saturnian moons, even asteroids, maybe even in human-made structures meant for living. And just being in those areas with new forms of gravity and new forms of, I guess, living, it's going to make a profound impact on how people think and how people would probably socialize with each other as well.
Or it could create spacism.
Spacism, yeah. Spacism. I like that.
It's like, I don't talk to those
Martians.
Yeah, those Martians. Oh, Lord. See, that's the opposite coin thing. You have no idea what... Well, I guess that's one of the risks with innovation.
Exactly.
Like with every small step and giant leap, there's, a giant leap backwards.
Yeah, a neutral development in a sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, sorry for that awkward pause for a second, but
no problem.
I was kind of thinking about switching gears real quick because we're at like 40-minute mark or so.
Alrighty.
So let's think about this. We've talked about innovation on a grand scale, like as grand as it gets, I guess. How can we think, let's bring this back to, well, for one, let's bring it back to Earth. But also, let's think about ourselves for a second. Maybe we're stagnating. Maybe we're in the same place at the same, the classic dead-end job, 9 to 5, go home, hate the rest of your life, sit at your couch and the only bit of pleasure is the TV before your spouse yells at you to get up or something. Whatever it may be, these tragic, stories of the everyday, working class man or something. These lives do exist. They do. And, you'd be dumb to not really, acknowledge that. But, so, the thing with optimism, where this is leading towards, is optimism. But it's not exactly blind, as we do need to be aware of all of these things, because these things are real. But with optimism, we need to have that clear lens of it examining, okay, this is what this is, but how can we make it better? Because if you don't have that level of optimism, which, in a sense, is... there's almost roots in naivety. Because you're taking a risk, in a sense. You're taking that risk to have naivety, to look for anything better, I guess, you know? So I guess tying it back to my point, how can we take this stagnation or depression or whatever it may be and innovate ourselves?
Well, I think the step to that is, I would say, probably very simple. Try something new. Try something that you've never done before. Innovation requires a lot of creativity on the behalf of humans, and it requires a lot of creativity for, I guess you could probably say, major engineering feats, but it probably would also require a lot of creativity to, I guess, find a new front or a hobby or at least a new way of living for yourself.
Okay, but I've heard this over and over again. Where do I start? And I'm not being facetious. I'm just being devil's advocate. Because a lot of people, it's good advice. It's real advice. But where do we start?
In engineering, I've learned a process. We actually have an entire lesson on how to brainstorm. And it basically is almost like a seed. You're like planting a seed that could develop creativity. And this seed does not have a lot of potential at first, but it can grow into something great. And one of these ways that you can do this, there's many methods to brainstorming. My favorite probably is a process called random entry. And the way you can do random entry is that you have a massive grids full of completely random words. Maybe you can just flip to random pages of a dictionary or something. Or maybe you can write it all down, just what first comes to mind. Probably better to do dictionary because that contains terms that you might not know. So you choose one of these random words, and then you kind of start to think like what to make a sense of that. So I'm going to give an example, like peanut butter or something like that. It's a pretty random word, right?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it.
Exactly. You have peanut butter. So take that word and just make up a sense and put it to the situation that you want to apply it to.
Okay.
What's something new that I can do? Peanut butter. I know, it sounds very disjointed at first, but now we're going to bridge that gap and make it into our tree. The soil is what is our question of what we want to make new, and the seed is this peanut butter word. You can say that peanut butter is used in a lot of good foods. So maybe I can be a baker or a cooker. Maybe I can start taking up some kind of hobby that involves making new things with peanut butter, or not even peanut butter at all. All they had to do is just make a step and think of like, what is this word associated with, and how can I apply it to my situation? And once you get to that point, you have an answer. You can try it out, see if it's good for you or not, and if you want to make it change your life. Or you can repeat the process over again, and you can try again and see if you want to innovate yourself.
And I guess like another step you could do is kind of just thinking about the things you do already, or like base it if you don't think that you do that many things, which is entirely possible. You could think about like basic traits that you have. Although with that, you have to be fair. You have to be logical with yourself. You can't just be self-deprecating and say, I'm not good at anything. I can't do anything. Like, you're good at something.
Exactly.
Like, even if... Hell, like, you could be good at complaining.
Exactly.
You could be really dang good at complaining. But there's something there. There's something there. Maybe you're articulate when you're complaining. Maybe you make good complaints. Even if it's not going towards something helpful or valuable and it's completely reductive. At least it's something. Think about it. Like, you're complaining, you're putting words together in ways that make sense. Maybe you're even getting something you want out of it. Maybe it's a stretch, but maybe you're meant to be an entrepreneur or something. Maybe a salesman, somebody who delivers a message to be convincing, persuasive, something like that. So even if it's something reductive or random, like complaining, that doesn't sound like it would have a good application. It's like maybe complaining doesn't. It doesn't. But unless you're a YouTube commenter, but but you can look at it, you can break it down, although it takes a lot of time. Even that's not easy, but just think about it. And that's somewhere to start.
Yeah. Like you said, there's something there. And like Michelangelo, you have to be willing to take the first chisel and remove a little part to see what's under.
He did David, right?
He did David.
I like the statue of David.
It's great. It looks like, when I saw it, we thought it can literally look like it could walk off. That's how amazing it was.
You've seen it in person?
I've seen it in person in Florence, yeah.
That's my one regret. I saw the Sistine Chapel, but I didn't get to see David.
Yeah, David, I think you should see it one day.
No.
He looks like he could just walk right off. That's how realistic he is.
Wow. Would you call it innovation? Or just why would you call it innovation?
I would call David and almost any of Michelangelo's... I'm just tripping over my words today. Mondale. Michelangelo's, all of his work is innovative as one of the Renaissance people. He revolutionized sculpting and art. Just so many fine details in it that made people amazed and inspired people.
Yeah. And then those people who are inspired can continue to innovate.
Yeah, preserve his legacy by doing similar things that he did, or maybe do something completely different. And you can see that Michelangelo's David... I can't talk. But Michelangelo's...
Leonardo. DiCaprio.
That his David created culture. Just like I was saying how innovation creates culture, his David became culture. It created culture.
That's interesting. You've mentioned culture a few times.
I mentioned it. I mentioned almost too many times, but yeah.
No. It's good. I'm just kind of surprised that I didn't catch myself or not catch myself, but I didn't talk about that more because that's such a big concept as well. So I'll ask you, what do you think's more important, the invention itself, or the Statue of David, the pencil, or the culture? Because the culture leaves the impact, but the invention is the thing itself.
It's all a matter of interpretation. If one can look at it and can only see it as a stepping stone and disregard its byproducts, one can completely look at it as not necessarily a stepping stone, but for all its byproducts that created. You can probably see I can give a good example of the second example I was mentioning. You can look at video games. They may have the new trendy ones may have not actually employed many, I guess, things and skills or new, I guess, techniques that made it super unique.
Mm-hmm. Like Fortnite or something.
Yeah, like Fortnite.
It's just another shooter game,
It's a copy of... I can go on a rant all day about Fortnite, but you can argue that it's a copy of many copies. But the culture that it created was insane.
That was always the weirdest thing about Fortnite to me. It was really? Fortnite?
Yeah, really. It was
this?
It wasn't necessarily...
I don't doubt that it's a bad game, but really? This?
Yeah. You can argue that this wasn't really much of a stepping stone, but it created all of this stuff. It was an innovation that had a byproduct. It wasn't that big of a step, but it created so much of that byproduct that I was talking about.
But that's interesting because it's was Fortnite innovative or was I don't know, the development of YouTube, for an example, innovative, where some guy like Ninja or I don't know the YouTubers. I'm not that hip like the kids these days, but were they the innovators because they took this random game like Fortnite? I mean, you remember at the same time there was PUBG or whatever other games that were the same thing, battle royale genre. Fortnite wasn't really revolutionary, it wasn't innovative, but these YouTubers,
they took it. And kind of they were almost like a catalyst for the byproduct to continue. So were
they the innovation, or was Fortnite the innovation?
That's a good question. It's almost like a chicken or the egg.
Yeah, exactly. Because Fortnite would be nothing without these YouTubers or without the culture, which I'm just for the sake of convenience, I'm just gonna say that the YouTubers were the main catalyst.
Yeah.
But was Fortnite only Fortnite because of them, or was Fortnite that standalone? I mean, I know it was a little different. I don't know much about it, but it's its own identity, I guess.
Something brought that to them. And they may have been innovators in the way that they did things themselves, the way they streamed, the way they maybe got together and did things together.
Mm-hmm.
But there was enough of that byproduct that kind of hooked them into it. It's almost like an expansion almost, or like evolution. The byproduct might actually bring things in and continue the innovation, even though the innovation itself is not actually that large of a step. The byproduct might make up the shortness of the step of the innovation.
Huh. It's... I mean, what am I supposed to say? It's like, you're right, or you're wrong. Yeah. It's like, yeah. Just said you're like, yeah, it is. It's just, I don't know. So what do you think is the big idea then? Like, if innovation, in a sense, is just this subjective term that I guess doesn't mean anything on its own unless somebody gives it meaning, what's the point? What's the takeaway?
It's, what you can use innovation as a word as is when people eat, they have a lot of things and sauces with bread. Bread is like almost like a vehicle for the sauce to be emphasized.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation can be your bread. You can use it as a vehicle to propel what you believe in, to propel the culture and the stepping stone. YouTube is probably a better example of taking it under the two lenses that we were describing as. You can see YouTube as a very big stepping stone, as a very big innovation, because it stored a lot of videos that could be used for education. It could be used for just learning. And it could be used for demonstrating things.
Like, I know countless people who, like, learned how to, like, change a tire because of YouTube.
Yeah.
Or something crazy like that.
And you can also look at YouTube as only for its byproduct, the amount of culture that's been developed. You can see commentary channels. You can almost argue that commentary channels were
YouTube drama.
YouTube drama. This is all the culture, and
it became meta. Yeah,
it became more innovation, which created more culture. It's almost like a cycle in a way, and it was almost like a branches of a single innovation created more innovation that created culture, like connected to each other. So you can see YouTube as a stepping stone for technology, but you can also see it as a creator of culture, as for its byproducts instead of its innovation itself.
An innovation that can go both ways, I guess.
Yeah.
As we've seen.
Over
the years. Man, there's a lot there, because it's like this endless cycle. But I guess one thing to kind of keep in mind if somebody out there is listening to this, like, innovation is kind of like how we define technology. It's neutral. It's basically this explosion of new culture, new ideas, like basically taking an invention and like adding so much to it, in many different areas. We just need to make sure that, I guess, it's good and it's meaningful, because it's so easy to misconstrue. Like, I mean, I bet the Gulag was pretty innovative.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
it's a prison in the middle of Siberia, one of the most dangerous environments on Earth.
Yeah, and it's like, why don't we put people here in this little work camp to have them do some extra stuff that we don't want to deal with? And this simultaneously handles my persecution problem, where it's like, well, we can't just kill them, but
we can exploit them.
Again, but don't quote me on this. I'm not Stalin, and I don't condone Stalin's actions.
Exactly.
But it's like it's innovative. That is innovative too, but it's not good innovation, because it leads to, well, not a good culture.
it was a bastardization of the technology.
Yeah.
It was a corruption of this technology by human beings. It's like the same thing about picking up that pencil. You can use it to write "I Have a Dream," or you can use it to write "Mein Kampf."
Yeah. There's no T, by the way. It's just Mein Kampf.
I can't speak German at all, or maybe
I can't either.
Maybe I just didn't remember that.
Your struggles.
my struggles of knowing German.
Yeah. Subliminal humor. We're almost to the hour mark, Kevin. So let me try to think of the closing question. So let's get a little personal here, if you don't mind. How do you try to innovate your life?
I try to kind of just try new things, I would say. There's some times where I kind of fall into pitfalls and kind of just remain in a stagnant state, like we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to find new things like hobbies and generally like news about new products to get excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Just a simple idea of innovating can get you excited enough to continue to improve yourself.
And what's your dream?
My dream is to become an astronaut and to go to space and to make it accessible for everyone else to do the exact same thing that I want to do.
Why?
Same thing I said before. I think everyone should see space, and I believe I agree with the astronauts. Everyone should see space and maybe get inspired by that. And maybe they can one day innovate. They can found the first coffee shop on Mars, or they can found the first hair salon on Titan, the moon of Saturn.
Yeah, I always like the coffee shop idea.
Yeah, everyone likes a coffee shop idea. Heck, that person might be more famous than the person who actually took this first step on the Mars.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's pretty extreme, you know? Like, you gotta import all that stuff from Earth and everything.
Or maybe you can colonize. You can start growing food there.
Can you imagine, like, these terminals of, like, subway, like, intergalactic, like, subway systems, like, going from Earth to the moon?
Spaceports.
This is Futurama garbage. I'm not, like, I can't even conceive this idea in my head. Like, this is just too out of this world.
Out of this world, guys.
Guys, I love using this one, as you can tell. But yeah, that's great, Kevin. Like, it's important to have a dream, because
I do believe that too.
Because a dream is the basis of innovation. It's the reason why you do anything. Yeah. It's the reason why. Like shortening that sentence to make it sound more philosophical.
Most philosophical, yeah.
But it's the reason why. It's the reason why behind everything. It's the reason why you get up in the morning. It's the reason why you pursued the career you did. And then, like, God's plan kind of just fills in the rest of the gaps. Like, because you went here to this school for this dream to become an astronaut, and the preceding thing is to go through engineering, and that's how you met me, and now we're doing a podcast now.
Yeah.
It's crazy how, like, innovation isn't stagnant, because even if you have a dream, even if you have an initial idea, because you have this idea and because you're trying to innovate, you just keep finding more ideas and more opportunities. Like this one, you didn't expect to be doing this.
Oh yeah.
I didn't expect to be doing this like a year ago, and it's been a year ago, but almost. But oh, the places you'll go, you know?
Yeah, Dr. Seuss.
Yeah. An innovator of his time.
Definitely.
But anyway, I guess we're kind of to the end here. Any final closing thoughts besides what we talked about?
Yeah, I hope people take something away from this and improve themselves, or help improve the society or something like that, or do what they love and maybe find something new that they want to love. I also appreciate you having me on your show. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for coming on here. It kind of stumbled me for a second, because I was like, all right, after he says this, I'm gonna like say thank you for joining me.
Oh,
and
okay.
Beat me to it, bro. Stick to the program that I didn't tell you about. Come on, man. But anyway, yeah.
I think the mind reader malfunctioned briefly.
Yeah, I think it kind of malfunctioned, but enough filler. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been the Innovation episode of Culmination's second season, and to everybody listening, I'll see you guys next time for another episode. Peace.